The laughter started before the hearing had even begun. My older brother, Brandon, leaned back in his chair and looked directly at me from across the courtroom. His expensive suit was perfectly pressed, and the smug smile on his face made it clear he believed the outcome was already decided. "No attorney, huh?" he said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You really think you can win this by yourself?" A few people chuckled. My father grinned proudly beside him. Their lawyer looked relaxed, like a man expecting an easy paycheck. I sat alone at the defense table. No attorney, no family standing beside me, no one offering encouragement, just me and a stack of carefully organized folders. Then the judge opened a thick file, glanced at the first page, and suddenly stopped. His expression shifted. He flipped to another page, then another. The courtroom slowly became silent. Even Brandon noticed. "What is it?" he asked. The attorney stared at the documents and went pale. For several seconds he said nothing. Then the words escaped his mouth. "Oh my God." My father frowned. "What are you talking about?" The lawyer swallowed hard. "You need to see her record." The judge removed his glasses and looked directly toward the plaintiff table. Then he spoke the sentence that changed everything. "Miss Parker does not require legal representation." 5 seconds later, my father nearly collapsed into his chair. But to understand why that moment mattered, you need to understand the family I came from. My name is Rachel Parker. For most of my childhood, I lived in the shadow of my older brother. In our house, Brandon could do no wrong. If he failed a class, my father blamed the teacher. If I earned top grades, my father asked why they were not higher. When Brandon quit jobs, my father said he was finding himself. When I worked overtime and earned promotions, nobody cared. The message was never spoken directly, but it was impossible to miss. Brandon mattered. I did not. My mother rarely challenged my father. She spent years trying to keep peace inside a house that seemed built around favoritism. Eventually she stopped fighting it. By the time I was 16, I had stopped expecting fairness. The only person who truly saw me was my grandfather. His name was Walter Parker, a retired military officer who carried himself with quiet confidence. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. When I was 14, I sat alone behind his workshop after my father spent an entire evening praising Brandon for barely graduating high school while ignoring my academic achievements. Grandpa found me sitting there. Without saying much, he handed me a soda and sat beside me. After several minutes of silence, he smiled. "You know why they misunderstand you?" I shrugged. "Because they are measuring you with the wrong ruler." Those words stayed with me forever. After high school, I joined the military. My father hated the idea. He said I would quit. He said I was wasting my future. He said I was not strong enough. Grandpa simply smiled. "Funny," he said, "they told me the same thing years ago." Over the next decade, my life changed. The military taught me discipline, leadership, and confidence. For the first time, my success depended entirely on my effort. Nobody cared whose daughter I was. Nobody cared whether my father approved of me. Performance mattered. Results mattered. And I thrived. Promotions came. Commendations followed. Leadership positions arrived. Yet every time I shared good news, my father somehow redirected the conversation back to Brandon. Meanwhile, my brother stumbled from one failed business venture to another. Each time he failed, my father rescued him financially. Each time he made mistakes, excuses appeared. The cycle repeated for years. Then my mother passed away unexpectedly. Her death shattered what little remained of our family. My father grew bitter. Brandon became even more entitled. And my grandfather became my closest friend. Every Sunday we talked. Sometimes about history. Sometimes about life. Sometimes about nothing important at all. Then one afternoon I received a phone call. Grandpa had suffered a stroke. I rushed to the hospital. When I arrived, he looked weak but alert. During one quiet moment, he squeezed my hand. "Still carrying everyone on your back." I laughed through tears. "Trying to." "Good," he whispered. That was our final meaningful conversation. 2 weeks later, he was gone. The funeral was painful. Brandon spent most of it looking at his phone. My father accepted sympathy from guests while barely speaking to me. I stood beside Grandpa's coffin, remembering the only person who had consistently believed in me. A week later, the family gathered for the reading of his will. At first everything seemed routine. Then the attorney reached the section concerning the estate. The room became quiet. Grandpa had accumulated considerable wealth over decades. Properties. Investments. Savings. Millions of dollars. Then came the shock. The majority of his estate was left to me. Not Brandon. Not my father. Me. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Brandon laughed. He thought it was a joke. When he realized it was real, his expression changed completely. My father stood up. "You manipulated him." The accusation stunned me. I stared at him. "You cannot honestly believe that." "Oh, I do," he replied. Within weeks, they filed a lawsuit challenging the will. They claimed fraud, manipulation, undue influence, anything that might help them take the inheritance. I informed the court that I would represent myself. When they heard that, they laughed harder than ever. The first day of trial felt surprisingly calm. I arrived early and organized my documents. Brandon walked in with a highly respected probate attorney. The man was known throughout the state for winning difficult cases. When he learned I was representing myself, he politely wished me luck. His expression suggested he expected me to lose. The hearing began. Their witnesses testified one after another. Neighbors, family acquaintances, old friends. Each one suggested that I had spent unusual amounts of time with Grandpa during his final years. The implication was obvious. I must have manipulated him. Throughout the testimony, I remained quiet. I took notes. I listened carefully. I waited. By lunch, Brandon looked delighted. My father seemed confident. Their attorney controlled the room. Everything appeared to be going their way. During recess, I sat alone reviewing evidence. The judge approached unexpectedly. "Miss Parker, may I ask a question?" "Of course. Why are you representing yourself?" I considered my answer. "Because this case is not really about money." He looked curious. "Then what is it about?" "My father spent my entire life deciding who I was. This time he is going to hear me for himself." The judge nodded thoughtfully and walked away. The next morning, everything changed. When court resumed, the judge carried an additional file. My military personnel record, a complete copy. As proceedings continued, he began reviewing it carefully. Eventually he looked toward their attorney. "Counsel, what exactly is your position regarding Miss Parker's ability to represent herself?" The attorney seemed confused. "I believe self-representation places her at a disadvantage." The judge opened the file. According to these records, Miss Parker completed advanced legal training while serving in the military. Silence filled the courtroom. He continued reading. "She participated in complex investigations involving financial misconduct." Another page. "She testified during numerous federal proceedings." Another page. "She possesses extensive experience reviewing evidence and questioning witnesses." That was when their attorney turned pale. Everything he believed about me vanished in seconds. The trial immediately shifted. When witnesses returned to the stand, I began cross-examination. One neighbor claimed Grandpa discussed changing his will after visits from me. I presented military deployment records proving I had been overseas during the dates she mentioned. Her testimony collapsed instantly. Another witness claimed Grandpa was isolated. I produced visitor logs showing he had barely visited Grandpa himself. His credibility disappeared. One witness after another fell apart under basic questioning. The courtroom atmosphere changed. People stopped seeing me as a helpless daughter. They started seeing me as someone fully prepared for battle. Then came the turning point. I introduced security footage from Grandpa's assisted living facility. The videos showed him discussing finances, reviewing documents, making decisions, and managing his affairs with complete clarity. The footage destroyed claims that he lacked mental capacity. Then I presented financial records. Years of them. The documents revealed hundreds of thousands of dollars my grandfather had given Brandon and my father. Loans, debt payments, business bailouts, financial rescues. The totals shocked everyone. My father and brother had received enormous support for years. Neither had repaid much of it. Then I revealed the evidence they never expected. Emails, hundreds of messages. Buried among them were conversations between Brandon and my father discussing Grandpa's estate. One email read, "If he changes the will, we are finished." Another said, "You need to convince him." Another stated, "He cannot leave everything to Rachel." The courtroom became completely silent. Finally, I played an audio recording. Grandpa's voice filled the room. Someone asked why he chose me. His answer was simple. "Rachel never asked me for anything." The room remained motionless. Then he added the sentence that ended the case. "She loved me before she knew what I owned." When the recording stopped, even I struggled to hold back emotion. The judge looked toward their attorney. "Do you still wish to argue undue influence?" The attorney glanced at the evidence, then at his clients. "No, Your Honor." Those 3 words hit harder than any verdict. The final day arrived. The courtroom was packed. People sensed something important was about to happen. Judge Morrison reviewed the evidence and delivered his ruling. The will remained valid. The lawsuit was dismissed. All claims were denied. Court costs would be paid by the plaintiffs. Brandon looked devastated. My father sat frozen. For most people, that would have been the end. But I had one final disclosure. I presented financial documents showing hidden asset transfers connected to the estate. Assets my father had never reported. The judge reviewed the records carefully. His expression darkened. "These transactions were never disclosed." "No, Your Honor." The courtroom became silent once again. The judge ordered the documents forwarded for further investigation. Brandon stared at my father in disbelief. "You knew about this?" My father could not answer. For the first time in his life, Brandon realized he had not been protected from the truth. When court adjourned, people slowly began leaving. I packed my files. Then I heard my name. "Rachel." I turned around. My father stood alone. He looked older than I had ever seen him. Tired, broken, defeated. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then he finally whispered something I had waited my entire childhood to hear. I was wrong. 3 simple words. 30 years too late. The strange thing was that I no longer needed them. My value had never depended on his approval. It never had. As we stood there, his hand suddenly moved to his chest. Confusion crossed his face, then pain. Within seconds he collapsed. Paramedics rushed into the courtroom. Brandon dropped beside him in panic. Watching my father lying on that floor felt surreal. Not because I hated him, because despite everything, he was still my father. After they took him away, I walked outside alone. The sun was beginning to set. Traffic moved through the city streets. People continued their lives. And for the first time in years, I felt completely free. I finally understood the lesson Grandpa had tried to teach me all those years ago. Some people will never recognize your worth. No amount of success can force them to see it, but their blindness does not reduce your value. The people who refuse to appreciate you cannot decide who you are. Only you can do that. And sometimes the greatest victory is not proving them wrong. It is realizing you never needed their approval in the first place.